All right, so we left chapter 12 with this picture. I just want to jog your memory of chapter 12, and because it's important for where we're going to go in chapter 13 and 14, which is the picture of Satan cast down out of heaven, and he comes to earth, and he is filled with fury because his time is short. And his goal at the end of chapter 12, verse 17, is to make war on the woman and the rest of her offspring who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. So that's his goal, and Satan is attacking the people of earth who belong to God, and he is going to, what follows in chapter 13 is part of his effort to make war on the saints. So everything we're going to talk about this morning about these beasts, keep that in mind. The goal here is about making war on God's people, and he is going to use these beasts to accomplish that goal. So it says at the end of verse 17, he stood on the sand of the sea, and then immediately in 13:1, he says, I saw a beast rising out of the sea. So you see the connection there. The scene doesn't change just because there's a chapter break. Instead, this is part of the devil or the dragon, his efforts to attack people on earth. So what we're going to see in chapters 13 and 14, chapter 13 is going to describe the rise of this beast and then sort of a supplementary beast that's going to contribute to his power. And then in chapter 14, we're going to flash again to God's people. This is described as on Mount Zion. Not really clear if we're talking about Mount Zion in the sense of Jerusalem, Mount Zion in some deeper sense like the New Jerusalem. We're not really told that, but it's where God's people are. So we're going to see Satan and his work, and then we're going to flash to God and his people. And then at the end of chapter 14, some final woes. So we're just going to call this the beasts and the lamb. We're going to see that contrast. First the beast comes, and then immediately we flash to the lamb with his people. All right, so I want to do some reading here in chapter 13. I've got a picture that I think is helpful on chapter 13. Hopefully it'll kind of stick in your head. And then I want to do a little work here, and then I want to jump back to Daniel because Mark taught Daniel, I forget, was that last quarter or the quarter before? They all run together for me. But he taught Daniel recently, and Daniel has some of these same images of beasts, and beasts as sort of oppressive nations. And in fact, I think a lot of the language is very similar, so much so that I wouldn't say I can identify this beast as one of Daniel's beasts, although I have my suspicions, but I can say this idea of what a beast would represent in apocalyptic literature, I think we can answer that question. So let's start just by reading chapter 13, verse 1. It says, I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 diadems on its horns and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard, its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to it, the dragon, gave his power and his throne and great authority. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. And they worshipped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, Who is like the beast, and who can fight against it? And the beast was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. Also, it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. And authority was given it over every tribe and people and language and nation, and all who dwell on earth will worship it, everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who was slain. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is to be taken captive, to captivity he goes. If anyone is to be slain with a sword he must be slain. Here is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. Then I saw another beast rising out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. It exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence, and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound was healed. It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in front of the people. And by the signs that it is allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who dwell on earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. And it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. Also it causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, that is, the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. Now that last part has become very well-known in popular culture, 666, and also the mark of the beast and that idea. We'll touch on that a little bit. I'm not sure you're going to be very satisfied with my thoughts on that, but I will say we need to understand it in the context of this broader picture of the emergence of this great beast. So key thought, everything we're going to cover today is right here. Satan can use earthly power to terrify and dazzle the world. He still does that. But Jesus' people worship God alone. So we're not going to be deceived by power. We're not also going to be coerced. We're going to maintain our allegiance to God if we're truly going to follow the Lamb. All right, but first we have to kind of see the emergence of this beast. It says, verse 1, I saw a beast rising out of the sea, 10 horns, 7 heads, 10 diadems, and then it becomes sort of a composite of different animals. In fact, it sounds like a composite of Daniel's beasts. In verse 2, a leopard, its feet like a bear's, its mouth like a lion's mouth. So here's the picture. Let me go forward a little bit. Here's the picture. It's a little dark, but you can see he's coming out of the water, and you can see the artist is trying to blend all these images that you have, where you got a bunch of heads, and you got the horns, and then you kind of got different animals. If you could see it well, if it was a little clearer, you could see how each head kind of has a different, like a bear, like a leopard, that kind of thing. But this is intended to be terrifying. Okay, so this is something, you're just a human being, and then you see this come out of the water. It's like, oh no, what am I going to do? And it is terrifying because it uses the power it has to terrify and kill people on earth, specifically those who are following Jesus, those who are, how does he put it? Making war on the saints is what he says. Yeah, so those who are the saints. So I hope you hear this. In fact, when you read this, and I think when most people read it, it's very imaginative, it's very fantastic, and so it can really lead us to say, wow, okay, there's going to be a day, in fact, this is probably the way most people read it, where some crazy stuff is going to start happening. There's going to be all these wild beasts coming out of the water and stuff, and they're going to be eating people, and oh, this is going to be so strange. Okay, so I want us to see there is a point to the imagination. It's intended to provoke terror. It's intended for us to say, wow, that's scary. All right, now, so you've got that feeling. Then John says there's not just a beast that's scary on its own, but you have a couple of things that happen. Verse 3, one of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. So it looks like it's going to die. And just think of one of the heads, if we're talking about kings or if we're talking about an aspect of a power or something like that, I don't know. But something happens. In fact, there's theories about what the mortal wound is and how it's healed, if it's about how the empire is about to fall and doesn't, whatever. But you get the point. Whatever you say it exactly is, the point is, it looks like things are going to be better and okay, and the beast is going to be defeated, but then it's not. In fact, it seems to almost come to life again. And instead of defeat, there is this fearful worship. And notice that the word worship is used in verse 4. They worshiped the dragon. Who's the dragon again? That's Satan from chapter 12, right? Okay, Satan is the dragon that tried to stop the baby from being born, the Messiah child. And now Satan is the one who's come to earth, and the dragon has given his power to the beast. So they worship the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast, and they worship the beast, saying, who is like the beast, and who can fight against it? All right, so the beast then is not only terrifying, but people in their terror are worshiping and even exalting the beast. Who's like the beast? Who can defeat the beast? Then there is also this idea that the beast's power also goes into religious realms or religious language and imagery. Verse 5 says that he was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words. It said back in verse 1 it had blasphemous names on its heads. So there's something here that's about it sort of challenging God's role and God's place, and people beginning to kind of treat the beast like God, worshiping it, allowing it to have these names, and sort of going along with its power, submitting. So then verse 7, also it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them, and authority was given it over every tribe and people and language and nation, and all who dwell on earth will worship it. All right, so it then becomes something that oppresses God's people specifically, and everyone else is, sort of bowing or else. All right, so I have tried to describe this in just Revelation's language as a beast, but I want to show you, I do believe that when a beast is described in apocalyptic literature, it is describing a nation, or probably more specifically an empire. And I want to show you why that's true. That's not just, I think that. I think that is the way that we have to read it when we read Daniel. So I want you to go back with me. Just leave your marker here. We'll come back in just a second. Let's go back to Daniel 7. And I hope you'll hear some of the echoes here of the beast idea. Now, let me just refresh you on Daniel. Remember in Daniel 2, you have the statue with the four different materials and the head of gold and all of that represented different empires. Nebuchadnezzar is told, he is one, and then the Medes and the Persians are one, and on it goes. And in the same way, in chapter 7, Daniel sees four great beasts in Daniel 7 and verse 3, and he describes each beast, one after the other, coming up. But then there is a fourth beast. Let's see. I'm losing my place. There it is, verse 7. Daniel 7 and verse 7. After this I saw in the night vision, and behold, a fourth beast, terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Okay, I hope you're hearing some similarities there. Look down a little further. He wants to know about the beasts. Verse 17, Daniel 7:17. These four great beasts are four kings who shall arise out of the earth, but the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever and ever. And verse 19, then I desired to know the truth about the fourth beast, which was different from all the rest, exceedingly terrifying, with its teeth of iron and claws of bronze, which devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. And about the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn that came up, before which 3 of them fell, the horn that had eyes and a mouth that spoke great things that seemed greater than its companions. As I looked, the horn made war with the saints and prevailed over them until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given for the saints of the Most High, and the time came when the saints possessed the kingdom. And he goes on to describe, if you read 23 down at the end of the chapter, some of that interaction between the saints and the fourth beast. I'm not telling you that this is necessarily the same beast as the fourth beast. I have my suspicions. My suspicion is that it is, but I can't say that's something I can prove. Here is what I am trying to get you to see. The language of a kingdom as a beast that then uses the power of the beast to oppress God's people. We've seen it before. We've seen it in Daniel. It's the way Daniel describes oppression of God's people. And remember, Daniel describes oppression in his own time, right? Like when Daniel is threatened by Nebuchadnezzar, bow to my statue, or not Daniel, but Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, bow to my statue or else you're thrown into the fiery furnace. Don't pray to any other god. Just pray to the king of Persia, or else you'll be thrown in the lion's den. It's that same idea. It's a beast saying, worship me or else. And it oppresses God's people because God's people are the ones who say, no, I'm not going to bow down. Now, the rest of the people, they say, okay, sure, whatever. You're just one more god among many. I'll worship the beast just like I worship everything else. But for God's people, that's a line that they can't cross. And you can see that same problem in Revelation 13. So let's go back to Revelation 13. I told you to put your finger or your marker there, but I didn't. I forgot to. So do as I say, not as I do. All right, so these first 10 verses, you have a beast that's empowered by the dragon, or Satan, gains great power in worldwide worship, blaspheming God and attacking his people. So I believe this is describing the Roman Empire. Most people agree with that. Most interpretations are on board with that. I think mainly it's that sense that it's the common sense way a person in this era would read something about an empire. If you read about an empire, then you would say, oh, okay, this is talking about Rome. And it's sort of like, for those of you who grew up or became adults during the time of the Cold War, and you were to read something about two great world powers, you would say, oh, I know who those are. It's just sort of the natural reading. It would be really strange for someone to say, oh, no, this is not talking about the United States and the Soviet Union. It's talking about India. You would say, okay, well, I guess it could, but that's not really what everybody would think. That's not really the facts of things. And I think in the same way, really no matter when Revelation was written in the 1st or 2nd century, you would say that about Rome. You know, if there's a big fearsome beast, like Daniel's beast, who could it be? It's going to be Rome. So then it becomes a question of, in what sense is, verse 7, the beast allowed to make war on the saints and conquer them, and especially some of the threats that come when the false prophet, the second beast, comes up at the end of the chapter. And so I want to give you some thoughts about that, but I don't want to get so deep into the specifics of this that we miss the point. I want you to think about what it would feel like to live in a place and time in which you are threatened by a fearsome government power. Disavow your God, worship me, do what I say or else. The line in the sand. And that's what's the threat here. Making war on the saints. Do this or else. That's the nature of the war. It's also blaspheming God and insisting on things that are rightly God's things. Verse 9 says, if anyone has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is to be taken captive, to captivity he goes. If anyone is to be slain with a sword he must be slain. Here is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. So at least part of Revelation's message is these things might happen to you. You might be slain with a sword, or you might be taken captive. If you're going to take a stand, you're fighting a beast, and it's a terrifying thing. Okay? Excuse me. So then you get a second beast in verse 11. Now, pretty much everything I've ever read says the first beast is Rome. Very little agreement on what the second beast is. So I'll do my best and tell you what I think. So the second beast, sometimes called the false prophet, because later in Revelation in chapter 16 is described as the false prophet, really has more of a religious dimension than a political dimension or like a force dimension. And his purview is going to be about the spiritual. It says in verse 11, I want you to notice, in verse 11 it says, it had two horns like a lamb. Who's the lamb in Revelation? Jesus, okay? So it's like a lamb, but how does it talk? Like a dragon. So it looks like Jesus and talks like Satan. Okay? False prophet, you get the idea. Okay? It looks like a prophet, seems like it's going to be good, and instead it turns out to actually be evil. Verse 12, it exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence, or that phrase can also mean on its behalf, and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast whose mortal wound was healed. It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in front of people, and by the signs that it's allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who dwell on the earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. So you can hear its goal is to validate the beast and encourage people to worship the beast. And the language here is very similar to the way that the Egyptian magicians are described. Remember how the Egyptian magicians do all kinds of signs to convince Pharaoh that, hey, you can do some of these things. We can replicate some of these plagues. We could turn water into blood too. And there's one of the little miracles that they try to do, they can't do. I think it's the gnats, the lice, whatever the tiny bug, whatever your translation says with the tiny bug. And they say, oh, we can't do this. This is the finger of God. But that idea that they're trying to undo the clear work of God and sort of mimic it is here. He's going to legitimate the power of the beast by saying, look what he can do. He deserves to be worshiped, and so he deceives the world. But there is a religious dimension to this. There is a blasphemy dimension to this. Okay, verse 15, It was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast so that the image of the beast might even speak and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. So here, he is not only validating that, but then causing people who refuse to bow down to be killed. Then, verse 16, there's an economic part. Also, it causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to be marked on the right hand of the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, that is the name of the beast or the number of its name. So they're not allowed to have part in normal, economic dealings unless they can prove that they worship the beast. They have his mark. And marks have been important. We saw seals about who we belong to, who's leading us. And so this is I pledge allegiance to the beast. I bow to the beast. I worship the beast. So I can now have a part in the beast's prosperity. And I can make money, I can buy and sell like anyone else. So you can see that there is then an implicit threat. If I won't bow down to the beast, if I won't wear his mark, I can't buy and sell. How am I going to survive? So even that puts more pressure on people, just like the political pressure where it's a fearsome beast. Then there is a religious pressure. He deserves your allegiance. And then there's an economic pressure. Do it or else you won't be able to survive. And all of these are sort of obstacles to the people of God continuing to worship God instead of Satan and his minions here on earth. So worship the first beast by false miracles, threats of economic exclusion. In terms of what that might be, I'm just going to throw this out there. This is what I think, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because I think specific interpretations can tend to distract us from what's actually here. But to me, I think this is probably something like the local governmental places that are pressuring people to worship the emperor cults. So in cities like the cities of Asia where these letters are written to, there are thriving emperor cults where they're to worship the emperor. They have temples in their name, burn incense to the emperor, treat him as a god. And I think probably this is sort of the local pressure. There is some evidence that people were required to, in some way, submit to the god or burn incense to the god before they were allowed to be a part of trade guilds and buy and sell. And so you can hear some of the threat there. If you don't do this, then this happens. I said at the beginning of the class, I don't see a lot of evidence for like a widespread Roman persecution in this time. What I see is more like that, like local pressure, like what you don't love Rome, you don't bow down to the emperor, and there is a threat in that. So I think that might be what the false prophet is. I may be totally off on that, but that's kind of where I sit. So the threat, though, I think, is clear. I think the threat is whoever's doing the pressure, the threat is you do this or else you don't belong. You're going to suffer, and you're either going to suffer financially or you may suffer physically, but you are going to hurt if you won't bow down to the beast. So I do want you to have that picture of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in your mind, saying, okay, bow down or else the furnace. It's one or the other. And that's the picture I think John is seeing for God's people. It is a scary thing and a scary time. We'll talk more about what that means in terms of nations, because I do think, while I don't think we live under that beast, I do think there are some things that we can apply to our time and our nation that are worthy of our thought. Okay, so it's a scary thing. These beasts have come and they're attacking God's people. And then we flash to Mount Zion. Chapter 14, verse 1. Then I looked, and behold, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, and with him 144,000 who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. I'm sorry, I'm not jumping over the mark of the beast. I didn't mean to do that. Somebody's going to be mad at me because I didn't say anything about 666. So let me just head that off. Okay. Yeah, so verse 18 is probably one of the best-known verses in Revelation. And everybody gets weirded out when they check out at the supermarket and it comes out to 666, right? Okay. So there are basically two schools of thought on what the 666 is. One is that it is a Jewish system of numbering letters that's called gematria. And if you look into this, it's like it's its own world. People really get into the gematria. And the idea is, A is so many numbers and B is so many numbers. And then you can add them all up and you get a certain number. And so some people do that and they think what's happening here is you get the number and you're supposed to say, this is the person that he's alluding to or who the beast really is. And so they take that when it says in verse 18, it is the number of a man, which can mean either it's the number of one human or it's a human number. They take it to mean, no, it's the number of one human, and that human is, in most cases, it's Nero. Because Nero, depending on how you spell his name, Nero's name can come out to 666. There's also a textual variant that's 616, and if you spell his name differently, you can get 616. I am not a gematria guy, and the reason I'm not is for this reason. Gematria is really hard to do backwards. I give you the number, and then, okay, now what's the name? Well, there's a million possibilities, right? Any name could add up to that. I just have to try all the names in the world and see what they add up to. I don't think this is intended to be a guesswork thing. I think instead something a little more straightforward, which is, I think 6 is 1 below 7. And I think 3 6s is just below 3 7s. I think this is about imperfection or evil in its fullest form. And I just think it's a symbolic number. Like I have said, all the numbers in Revelation are symbolic. We keep coming back to that, right? And so when I see that, I think he is just saying, if you were to numeralize this man or this empire or these beasts, what you would end up with is almost good, almost perfect, but not. Instead, falling well short, and it's 666. So I know that I told you in the beginning, I don't think that's going to make everybody super happy, but that's what I think that is. So if you want to go along with fancier explanations of 666, you be my guest, but that's what I'm going to say. So don't get mad at me. You can get mad at me because you don't like that answer. That's fine. But don't get mad at me because I didn't address it, because I remembered and I talked about it. Okay, so chapter 14. So we flash from the beast to the lamb. By the way, this is where we get On Zion's Glorious Summit, that song we sing sometimes. And here we have On Zion's Glorious Summit. We have the lamb and 144,000. They do not wear the mark of the beast. Instead, they wear the name of the lamb in verse 1 and his father's name on their foreheads. All right, so verse 2, I heard a voice from heaven like the roar of many waters and like the sound of loud thunder. The voice I heard was like the sound of harpists playing on their harps, and they were singing a new song before the throne and before the 4 living creatures and before the elders. No one could learn that song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. It is these who have not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins. It is these who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These have been redeemed from mankind as firstfruits for God and the Lamb, and in their mouth no lie was found, for they are blameless. All right, so these, you can see they have a song of victory, even though they have been conquered, even though the beast maybe has made war on them and has defeated them or overcome them, and yet here they are on Mount Zion with the Lamb. Here they are. They have overcome. And they learn this new song, verse 2 and verse 3, that no one else can know. So it's sort of a special blessing for them. They have defining traits in verse 4. They have not defiled themselves with women. They follow the Lamb wherever he goes, and they have been redeemed from mankind because no lie was found in their mouths. So in terms of the have not defiled themselves, I don't think this is talking about literal sexual relations or literal virgins. I think this is more about symbolic, spiritual fornication, like it describes down a little further in verse 8. She made all nations drink of the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality. Okay, is that literal sexual immorality? I don't think so. I think just like the harlot in chapter 17, I think that the adultery here is figurative for no longer being faithful to God. These are people who refuse to compromise their primary allegiance. They are virgins. They are pure. Also, I think the same about lying in verse 5. Lying often comes up in Revelation. We'll see it again in chapter 21 and 22, where in the New Jerusalem, no one is allowed who is a liar Okay, and anyone in whom an untruth or a lie is found in chapter 22 is no longer allowed in the New Jerusalem. So lying is about that same idea of compromising, saying something that's not true. Yes, I believe in Jesus. Yes, I also believe the Lamb is God. The beast is God. I can't do both. And then just following, in verse 4, following the Lamb wherever he goes, that to me is even in suffering. I follow the Lamb, and I don't follow the beast, even though he has great power and is very intimidating. All right, so the last part of chapter 14, verse 6 down to verse 20, is about judgment. We turn again to judgment, and there are 3 angels that describe a judgment, and then we have the reaping or harvest of the earth. Okay, so these 3 angels, they give warnings. Verse 6, saw another angel flying directly overhead with an eternal gospel to proclaim to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation, tribe, language, and people. He said with a loud voice, "Fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea, and the springs of water." I want you to hear it, okay? Not fear the beast, fear God. Who deserves your worship? Fear God. That's the message. Fear God. He is the one who deserves your allegiance, not he needs it. And worship him. I just want that God and that him to be emphatic because they're contrast to the beast. Verse 8, another angel, a second, followed, saying, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, she who made all nations drink the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality." Fallen, fallen. Now Babylon hasn't fallen yet, but what he's describing is she's as good as gone. It's that sort of prophetic past tense. She's already fallen. Her end has been declared. Her time has come. She has deceived the nation. She's made them drunk. And those are the ways that this is described throughout Revelation. Even after Satan is released in chapter 20, again, he's going to go out and deceive the nations again. That same idea of getting them to cheat by doing things they shouldn't do and believing things they shouldn't believe. Verse 9, a third angel, if anyone worships the beast and its image, receives a mark on his forehead or on his hand, he also will drink the wine of God's wrath, poured full strength into the cup of his anger. He will be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever, and they have no rest day or night, these worshipers of the beast and its image, and whoever receives the mark of its name. Here is a call for the endurance of the saints, those who keep the commandments of God and their faith in Jesus. And I heard a voice from heaven saying, "Write this, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Blessed indeed, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, for their deeds follow them." I hope you notice that last part connects back to chapter 13 and verse 10. It is where the story is sort of interrupted and saying, hey, my people, pay attention. This is going to mean you're going to have to endure. And in fact, you may die, but blessed are those who die in the Lord, because their works follow them. They rest from their labors and their works follow them. So this last angel, his message is, hey, anybody who gets in bed with the Lamb, in bed with the beast, so to speak, is going to be punished like the beast. Babylon has fallen. You're going to fall too. So don't do it. You don't want it. Don't be a part of it. And so then he says to my people, look, this is going to mean you have to endure. This is going to be hard on you. So warnings there about impending judgment. And then this last part, you have an angel reaping the earth. It's a gruesome image because, instead of grapes, it's blood. Instead of the winepress being full of the blood of the grapes, it's the blood of human beings. All right, so here, we'll just read this rather quickly. 14, I looked and behold a white cloud, and seated on the cloud one like a son of man with a golden crown on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. And another angel came out of the temple, calling with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, "Put in your sickle and reap, for the hour to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is fully ripe." So he who sat on the cloud swung his sickle across the earth, and the earth was reaped. And another angel came out of the temple in heaven. He too had a sharp sickle. And another angel came out from the altar, the angel who has authority over the fire. And he called with a loud voice to the one who had the sharp sickle, "Put in your sickle and gather the clusters from the vine of the earth, for its grapes are ripe." So the angel swung his sickle across the earth and gathered the grape harvest of the earth and threw it into the winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden outside the city, and blood flowed from the winepress as high as a horse's bridle for 1,600 stadia. So I put this in your notes. There are other pictures of judgment that are about reaping. In fact, that's a very common image, even in Jesus' parables, for what happens at the end of the age is there's a harvest or a reaping, and then there's a separation. Here, the reaping is all about wrath. God is angry, and he is angry about the beast, and he's pledging, I'm going to be done with the beast, and also whoever is compromising with him, and that is going to look like bloodshed. So, an expression of God's wrath, the angel reaps the earth's blood. So where that's going to leave us for next week, before I jump into kind of what I want us to take from this, is in chapters 15 and 16, you're going to get one last judgment cycle. That's about the bowls. We're pouring out the bowls, and then we'll have the sort of the fall of Babylon and the rejoicing of the people. So it is God seeing this scene in chapter 13, 12 and 13, and saying, I'm going to act. The time is coming. I'm going to act. And now we're seeing how that wrath is being poured out as God responds to the cry of his people for justice as they are oppressed by this beast. Okay. I'm not asking for questions yet, by the way. I've got some more things to say. I want you to think about what this might mean. I know it might be a little hazy as to what all is being said here. I know we've said a lot of things and read a lot of things this morning. But I think it's important for us to kind of step back and think about how this might apply. I think one of the things that we learn here is that nations can gain power and demand allegiance that should be reserved for God. I think you see that here. I think we know the specific historical instances where this happens in terms of Rome. But I also think this is a principle. God notices this disrespect and calls his followers to retain critical distance from their governments. So if you lived under the Roman regime, you would have obligations to Rome, right? Just like we do, to submit to the ruling authorities. And yet, there had to be a point at which these Christians who were under the supervision of Rome had to say, I cannot go farther than this. I cannot cross that line. I cannot obey you about this, and I will not. And that seems to me to be the expectation of Revelation 13 and 14. I hope it does to you too, that they were to say no to their government. Even though the government is a fearsome beast, and it's sort of like that picture, of Tiananmen Square, where you have the tank facing the one man. That's sort of the picture. Here we are against a government with all the resources and all the power that a government would have, and we say, no, I won't cross that line. I will not disavow my faith to submit to you. I hope you hear the challenge in that. The words I use to describe it here are retaining critical distance. What I mean by that is, it looks to me like Revelation 13 is all of the world wrapped up in unquestioning allegiance and obedience to Rome. We're going to follow Rome. We're going to worship Rome. Who is like the beast? Who can defeat the beast? If we lived under that regime, we would appreciate the fact that there would be peace and prosperity that came because we belonged to that nation, right? And yet, there was a point at which that line was crossed, in which it was too much. Too much was demanded, and people had to say no. Christians had to say no. And so when I say God calls his followers to retain critical distance, I am saying he's calling out to his people. Here is a call for the endurance of the saints, to be able to say, is what I'm being asked to do or called on to do and believe, is it really in keeping with my allegiance to God? Is it right? We often say this when we talk about government, that yes, we submit to government as long as it does not conflict, right, with our primary allegiance to God. We must obey God rather than men. And yet here is a time in the flesh, in Revelation, where that is tested. We have to maintain the critical distance to say, my government is not all good, and the things it calls on me to do are not all good. And I need to be able to say, I am a Christian first, not an American first, not a Roman first. And therefore, there may be times where I have to say no to my government, whatever consequences that may bring. And I want you to think about that, because I believe that's part of the message Revelation is giving us here. Standing against such powers, even by simply refusing to give in to their demands, comes with a physical, social, and economic cost. These people die, these people are shunned, these people are not allowed to buy or sell. And I think we need to accept that. That is not sugar-coated in Revelation at all. It is not, oh, well, this shouldn't be. Obviously, it shouldn't be, and God is going to do the judging on that. Yet we have to make our choices. When God gets around to that, that's on God's timetable. But I have to decide, am I going to do right or wrong in the moment I'm in? The intensifying horror of life on earth does not change the reality of the Lamb and his followers. I want you to know this. Do you ever feel like things are going crazy in the world? Do you ever feel like you don't know what's happening? Do you ever feel like things are getting worse and worse and worse? Imagine what these people felt in Revelation 13. Imagine. In fact, I would call on us to say, that's the way it always feels. Because evil is at work in the world, and Satan comes to us with great wrath because his time is short. So he's going to do whatever he can to make us feel those feelings, to make us think it's not worth doing what's right, standing up, continuing to follow the Lamb. And yet, here he is. Flash over to Mount Zion, and there's the Lamb with his people, still there. I will also point out, it's interesting that this irrigation of power often involves religious symbolism and religious rhetoric. We saw that in a couple of places. Holy words, holy objects, things that cannot be spoken against, things that cannot be profaned, that have to do with the nation, as if the nation is holy, the nation is sacred. That was true in Rome, it can be true in America, and I think we have to maintain critical distance. Who are we worshiping? Do we worship our nation? Do we worship our government? Or do we worship God? Where is our primary allegiance? Maintaining critical distance. These three warning messages that we read describe what God thinks about the emergence of the beast. That we fear God instead of the beast, that Babylon has already fallen, and that compromise with the beast will bring wrath. I want you to feel I put this as the word binary. This passage is very binary. There's not a lot of middle ground here, is there? Is anybody in the text not worshiping the Lamb or the beast? Anybody neutral? Nobody's neutral. And I think John is telling us, this is the way the world is. You need to see the world this way. But you have choices to make about who your allegiance is going to be to and how you're going to live as a result of that. And if you stand with the beast, you get what the beast gets, even though right now it looks like the beast is doing pretty well. All right. I got 1 minute. So I would say comments and questions, but it would be like I'm teasing you. So it doesn't seem very nice. Let's just talk about some key lessons, and we'll be done for the morning. First, truth is not determined by popularity. I think you see that in this text. I think we know that. We've kind of heard that phrase a lot. But I think we really need to say what that's going to look like is a whole bunch of people believing things that are false and declaring them emphatically. In fact, pressuring you to believe them, things that are false. So I would say this to all of us, particularly those of us who are younger. You don't find truth just by asking, what does everybody else think? That's not the direction of truth. Here, everybody else thought the beast was the one who deserved worship. Political power can be used for evil. I think we all know that. I think we knew that before we came in, right? Christians must endure. In fact, I think there is something here about the toughness of Christian faith, that we're going to have to be able to keep going through difficult things, that we're not going to be weak and fragile, and we're not going to be easily dissuaded from serving God. And sometimes, when we don't emphasize that, and maybe when we don't live in times of overt persecution, we forget that. And we think it's kind of easy to be a Christian, and we're just going to keep floating along. But that's not at all what you get from this section. There are often economic repercussions for serving Jesus. You can see that here. No one can buy or sell. But you can also see that throughout the Gospels where people are giving things up, giving up their money, sacrificing to help needy people around them. I follow Jesus, and then the question is, okay, do I really believe that? And instead of just words, it's what happens with my money. And then we have to learn to see through physical things to the spiritual realities behind them. Stuff is happening all around us. And the question is, do we know why it's happening? Who's really in charge? Who's inspiring this? Who are we serving? And how do our everyday actions fall into those categories? Am I serving the Lamb? Am I serving the beast? All right, I could say way more, and I know you guys could. So thank